Welcome back to Trauma Free Relationship. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Tom Philp, and I've been helping couples for decades break the painful patterns that keep them stuck so that they can communicate better, repair more quickly, and stay connected longer. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about something that I've certainly seen over the arc of my career in helping couples. And that is that a lot of couples come in and they will engage in coaching or therapy or whatever it is they want. Their goals are to seek out of our time together. And oftentimes what will happen is when things will get a little bit better, then they decide that's good enough. And so what I want to talk about today is what we call first order versus second order change. First order change is change that can improve the relationship, but sometimes it's surface change. It's arguing less, or it's focusing on certain behaviors. Whereas second order change is really more transformational change in the relationship. It's change that actually sustains real transformation for the long term in the relationship. So, most couples seek what I call surface changes. Today, we're going to dig in and we're going to talk about the difference between the two and find out what is it that creates real transformation in your relationship. All right, let's dig in. So, as I mentioned, first order change, it's just a psychological term. It's nothing fancy. Basically, what that means is that it tends to be primarily more surface change. And while that is important and can be important in the life of the relationship or in the life of the person, it doesn't necessarily create lasting change. So let me give you some examples. Most couples that come to see me and want to work with me say overwhelmingly, we need to work on our communication. We need better communication. And they're right. They're not wrong about that. Communication has broken down. But if I give them, say, communication tools or techniques, or say, hey, start using I statements instead of you statements, the reason that doesn't always work in the real world as a long-term solution, it can be short-term, but not long-term, is because when you get triggered by each other, the I statements go out the window. And so what really is happening is underneath the surface, the system is still the same, even though we're changing what feels like more surface level stuff. Yes, we do need to restore communication and connection. But what's happening is we're not really getting at the root of the problem, which is often what feels more like second order change as opposed to first order change. So promising not to yell, trying to take deep breaths, those are all important behavioral changes. But if we just stop there, often what happens then is the couple will get stuck in making surface changes, but not necessarily more systemic changes. This is why I and many other people as well focus so much on the cycle, because the cycle oftentimes is the first step to being able to create more real transformational change in the relationship, second order change. So the cycle comes along, the couple tries to communicate something, it escalates, they get frustrated, they take a break, they calm down, they might come back together and repair, but most often they don't. And so what ends up happening is they go back to their normal way of being, what we call homeostasis, back to their norm. So they don't need a break anymore. They've warmed back up. They're speaking to each other. They've kind of shoved it under the carpet, so to speak. And now they're just back into their everyday to day life until it happens again. And so whatever promises were made, well, I'm sorry I got upset, or I won't yell, or if you could just say it like this next time, those things ultimately don't work. And they don't work because we're not getting below the surface at creating real change in the relationship. And that is being able to identify our cycle, being able to interrupt it in real time, being able to regulate our emotions. These are what we call second order changes. And second order changes means we're getting at sort of the fundamentals that are driving those cycles. And when we start to really create those fundamental changes, now we've got the makings of more long sustained transformation in the relationship. So the second order change is where we begin to change the relational system itself. We begin to understand, notice, name, and normalize. That's a technique I teach a lot of my couples. Notice, name, and normalize your pattern. Because when you can do that, the chances of you being able to stop it early and catch it before it escalates, now you're starting to really change the system. So we're not focusing on one behavior or just the words. Hey, if you could just say it this way, or that's not how you said it. We begin to change the entire emotional pattern. And this is much more fundamental. So second order changes address the following. These are not an exhaustive list, but this is pretty close, I think. It addresses the attachment wounds that have occurred in the relationship, and or it begins to address past trauma, the wounds that were brought into the relationship. And this is really important because oftentimes the cycles are being driven by dysregulation. One or both partners get triggered, they become escalated, they feel not heard, not understood. But what's really happening in those moments is they've been wounded by something. And it's touched, their partner has triggered sort of an unmet attachment need or a wound that has occurred. And again, this could be a past wound, something we brought into our relationships, or it could be a wound that we've sustained in the relationship. And so attachment wounds are addressing those are what we call second order change. Nervous system dysregulation. If you've been on this channel or podcast at all, you know I talk a lot about regulation. We regulate before we communicate. That's a mantra in our relationship cycle reset program. We regulate before we communicate, because if we're not regulated, we're not going to communicate well. And I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to myself when I say that as well. I think about an episode last night between my wife and I. I got frustrated. I became a little bit dysregulated for sure. And guess what? It broke down communication. And a few hours later, when I was more calm, I'm like, well, that was pretty stupid, Tom. You know better than that. You didn't follow your own rules. You didn't walk your own walk. And when I get upset like that, guess what? My wife's not going to be able to hear, one, what I'm really trying to communicate. She's going to hear that I'm angry and upset with her. And two, I'm not even really communicating very clearly. I was reacting out of anger, but what I was really trying to address never really got communicated. So I got in my own way in that instance as well. And so, like I said, a lot of this stuff that I talk about, man, I put myself right there in that category as well, because we're all human. We're all on this same journey. We're all trying to get a little bit better and develop and grow a little bit more each and every day. So I don't exclude myself from any of the things that I talk about on here. And so the example last night, Ryan, is I needed to regulate first and then try to communicate, because I wasn't clear in myself what I was really trying to communicate. I was reacting out of defensive anger, and that created a cycle, and she was not able to hear what I was really upset about or my real concern. All she heard is that I'm angry at her and I'm blaming her. And so the whole thing broke down for a couple of hours until we were able to come back together and talk about it. So nervous system regulation. Boy, if I had been able to, in that moment, take a deep breath, calm myself down, maybe not respond right away or tell her I need a few minutes, whatever that might have been, then I might have been able to communicate, and we might have been able to have a much better conversation and dialogue about what was really going on. Emotional safety is another one. When we feel emotionally safe to our partner, when we feel like we can open up and talk, that's another second order change. That's getting at some of the cycle, and that's getting at the system itself. When we go from an insecure system to a more secure system, when we go from feeling insecure and walking on eggshells with our partner to feeling more safe and secure in the relationship, we can trust that if we communicate something, even though it's not perfect, our partner's going to try to hear us. They're going to try to understand us. They're going to try to make it safe for us to be able to open up and communicate. That's one of those fundamental second order changes. Another one is our reactive roles, right? If we can stop and we can respond with care and curiosity as opposed to immediate secondary emotions like anger is a secondary emotion. Oh, I don't like what you're saying, so I'm going to immediately interrupt or respond with anger. And so if we can really be able to control ourselves and sit with the uncomfortable feelings that may be coming up, stay in that window of tolerance that I talk about a lot, then that's a second order change, because all of a sudden now we're doing what? We're regulating better. We're creating more safety in the relationship. We're probably not activating our partner's attachment wounds as much. And so the whole system begins to change. Those unconscious fears definitely is another one to target in second order change. When we begin to communicate more of our fears, when our partner can assure us and comfort us in those moments, that's a second order change. And then finally, as I've mentioned already in passing, when we begin to change the cycle itself, when we go from a pursue, withdraw, an insecure cycle to a sort of being able to meet each other in the moment, sit with each other's emotions long enough to understand them and respond with care and curiosity and hear and summarize and all those things that make for better communication, then we begin to change the cycle itself. And that is a second order change, because we fundamentally now begin to create real transformation in the relationship. And so that's just some of the differences between a first order and a second order change. First order change is, well, if you'd have just said it like this, or first order change is, well, I'm going to get really angry and I'm going to say hurtful things, but I don't mean those. So if you could just stop saying hurtful things in the moment. Well, how about getting regulated in the moment so those hurtful things don't come out of our mouth? So those types of things can be first order changes versus second order. Now, a lot of this, is comes from a sort of a systems perspective. So you've heard me talk a lot about the cycle in the relationship and how so often the cycle is one of the primary problems. And it is because part of what happens is couples often don't learn how to break their cycle to get to those underlying issues in order to create real transformation. So I'm going to circle back to what I opened up with. A lot of couples that I work with and have for the last 15, 20 years, they start to feel better when the cycle gets a little bit better. And they're not arguing much, and they're doing a little bit better at repairs, and they're regulating themselves a little bit better. All important, don't get me wrong. But then they say, hey, I think we're good. And then they're gone. And what happens oftentimes is they come back around because they really never got to those second order changes that really fundamentally transform the relationship by restructuring the cycle. Yes, it got better. They learned how to de-escalate their cycle a little bit. They learned how to maybe catch it earlier more often, but they didn't get to any of the attachment wounds. They didn't get into any of the different attachment patterns that show up, the pursue, withdraw, or I'm more avoidant in my attachment style. Now I know how to regulate myself better and stay engaged longer. Or I'm more anxious in my attachment style. Now I know how to self-soothe better so I don't overwhelm my partner. Those are second order changes. And so a lot of times I think couples, they don't want to argue. They don't want to fight, and they get exhausted by it. And man, I get that. Nobody gets into a relationship to feel unheard, to feel misunderstood, to argue with their partner, to constantly have to defend themselves. It is exhausting to get stuck in those cycles. But there's a big difference between communication techniques and behavioral change and, hey, we're arguing less, versus we are connecting at so much a deeper level now, deeper than I've ever connected with somebody before, because I'm working on my attachment wounds. I'm regulating myself better. I'm working on my defensive patterns so I don't show up the same. I see the cycle and I know my role in it. And my partner is showing up in ways for me I've never felt somebody show up for me before. That is a fundamental, real transformative type of change. And when that occurs, something incredible happens, not only in the relationship, but within each partner themselves. And so, as I'm laying out here, hopefully clearly enough that you can get the idea, we are not separate individuals. We are a system, and we get caught in these feedback loops. And as the example I gave earlier, when I was frustrated with my wife last night, I can guarantee you what she heard was the frustration and the anger directed at her. She did not hear what I was trying to say. She heard the blame and criticism. She did not hear the content enough to be able to sit with it and understand it. And so much of that is my fault. It's on me because of the way I communicated that. That was part of our cycle playing out. If I had learned how to regulate myself, or if I'd done a better job of it last night, then I could have expressed myself in a way that would not have led to immediate defensiveness and would not have blocked out what I wanted her to hear. It would have been easier for her to hear it if it didn't come across as blame and criticism, because it was said in an angry tone. And so when we're able to come back together, and I'm not saying I'm perfect at this by any means, so don't think that somehow I've got this all figured out. I fall short too, for sure. But when I did calm down, I was able to come back and say, hey, I'm sorry. I know when I get frustrated like that and I use an angry tone, you can't really hear what I'm trying to say. And I'm not even clearly communicating with myself in that moment as well. Here's my concern, and here's what was coming up for me. And this is what I'm trying to communicate to you. When I did that, then she was able to hear much better the issue that I was trying to bring up. That hey, honey, I feel like you are telling me two different things, and I don't know, really, I'm not clear on what you want, because I hear you saying one thing and then I hear you saying another. And I gave her some examples of that. And I'm not clear. I need help on what it is you really need from me and want from me. When I was able to do that, it was a much more productive conversation. And so, I hope as I'm illustrating this here, that being able to create some second order change, being able to reduce the cycle so that we can get to the unmet attachment needs, we can heal some of those wounds. That is where we really end up creating true or real transformation in the relationship. And so it's really important to recognize, though, I want to add this, that as long as you're caught in your cycles, you can't get to these other things. They're too deep and they're too vulnerable, and they will not be exposed. It's too dangerous for them to be exposed as long as we play out our cycle, which is why I talk so much about the cycle. Because in all the years I've been working with, I can't get to those more fundamental needs from each partner. I can't get them to show up in a different way and regulate themselves and be more vulnerable and ask for their needs to be met until we are able to really reduce that cycle, significantly learn how to not be so immediately reactive to each other and how to get stuck in that feedback loop. And so that is really important. And so the end result is, how do we create real transformation? Well, I laid out some of the things that are important in creating real transformation, such as nervous system, right? Let's put this into context. If I'm anxiously attached, how can I soothe myself if I get triggered? So I'm not immediately bringing all of that anxiety and all of that anger or all that energy even to my partner in a way that raises their defenses. How can I self-soothe in a way that maybe I don't even need to take it to my partner because I can work it through myself? What happens if I get triggered and immediately my brain goes to a past wound and I start thinking, okay, my partner's doing this and they're doing this and they're doing this. Now I've got zero evidence at this point that they're doing anything wrong. All I know is the text they sent triggered me, and now my brain is going to the worst case scenario, and I'm skewing the entire perspective of what's happening here. I'm not making this up. These are real scenarios that happen all the time. I see them. If in fact I'm able to comfort myself, soothe myself, if I'm able to listen to some soothing music, if I can pull out some old letters of my partner saying how much they love me and care for me, I can have compassion for that wound that got triggered in the moment, it might be possible. And this is the real transformation I'm talking about. It might be possible for me then to not even have to take this to my partner, for me to be able to comfort and soothe myself through it, that I know my partner's not doing anything wrong, and I don't have to go create a cycle. Rather, I can comfort and soothe myself and regulate myself and show up for myself in ways that other people in my past didn't show up for me, or in ways even maybe my partner in our past history of the relationship didn't show up for me. And so that is a real transformation. And we could say the same thing from the more avoidant style. If the more avoidant style partner, when they get triggered by their partner asking them questions or wanting to have an emotional conversation, they begin to feel a little bit overwhelmed. If in the moment they can begin to regulate themselves, stay in the window of tolerance, ask their partner, can we slow this down just a little bit because I'm starting to get triggered, but I want to stay engaged. I want to hear what you're saying. I don't want to have to lead this conversation. Let's just slow this down just a hair. Even the sheer fact of saying that is huge transformational change in the life of the partner as well as the relationship. So these are the kinds of things I'm talking about when I talk about real transformational change, especially beginning to heal those attachment wounds, the fear of abandonment or rejection, or those core beliefs of I'm not good enough, I'll never measure up, it'll never be enough, I'm too much for others. Those unconscious sort of attachment wounds that we've held on to because of past relationships that created those wounds in the first place. And then, of course, if we begin to work on our protective strategies, that's real transformational change as well. Being able to restructure shutdown so I don't turn off my emotions and go to my head. I can stay present and in the moment and emotionally available to my partner. And, I can soothe my anxiety and I can get clear on my fears in that moment so I can communicate my fears to my partner, not my criticisms or complaints. And so these are the types of things that come along with second order change. And I understand those are more difficult. Those are harder sometimes to get to because first we've got to make sure that we really learn how to de-escalate our cycles in order to get to these more fundamental drivers of what's happening in the relationship. That's not easy work to do. It takes time and it takes patience and it takes effort and it takes intentionality on both partners' part. But when that happens, then you can start to create real, sustained, transformational change in the relationship.